Good morning, Sean, again. I'm happy, well, I wish I could say I'm happy to see you this morning, but I'm happy to know you're there. And it certainly has been a real pleasure this week to get back into the groove and to see so many of you and to spend some time with you in classes and other places. So every once in a while, there's a headline that kind of stops you in your tracks. And I saw such a headline last week. It said, "The Pope says that gossip is a curse worse than COVID." Did you see that headline? I saw it in a number of places. And I thought, gossip worse than COVID? What do I know? I'm not the Pope, right? So what I do know is that we like to gossip around here. We do a lot of gossiping. And it's not surprising because we're a very kind of intimate community. And, you know, it's a place where we like to gossip. And I think the other thing about gossip is that it is a way to create, very quickly to create closeness with the person with whom we're gossiping. It's a way of kind of creating immediate intimacy. I don't think it's necessarily a good way, but it's a way. And the form that gossip takes seems to me most often is complaining, you know, talking about the things, the people, the experiences, the situations that we're unhappy about. And I think we do a lot of that around here too. In fact, maybe that's the kind of the main form of our gossiping takes. You know, and I'm talking to myself as much as to you, believe me, this morning. I may be pointing my finger at you, but of course there's three fingers pointing back at me. And you know, you may say, what's wrong with gossip? Or what's wrong with complaining? Because, you know, sometimes it feels so good just to unleash a river of unhappiness with each other. And I'll tell you what the problem with gossip is. The problem is that, with complaining gossip, the problem is that when we complain, however we look at it, what we're really doing is we are, you know, not taking responsibility for our lives and for our situations. So what complaining is a kind of it's a way of being a victim. It's a way of blaming other people for our unhappiness in such a way that we kind of stop ourselves. We kind of constrict ourselves from actually doing anything about it. If we're complaining, we're really saying my unhappiness is the result of other people's actions and words. So the opposite of complaining isn't to not complain. The opposite of complaining is to take responsibility for our lives and actions. And that's the kind of path we want to go down as a community. The more responsible we are for ourselves, the more we'll be able to support one another, and the more powerful a community of learning that we'll become. So I had a friend who, a few years ago, was diagnosed with cancer obviously through no fault of his own. He was a pretty healthy guy. He didn't bring the cancer on himself. It wasn't his fault. And if he had decided to complain a lot about it, you know, nobody would have really criticized him for that. We might not have enjoyed it, but we would have certainly understood it. But my friend didn't complain. I don't think I've ever heard him complain about having cancer. And I think the reason is because he decided early on that he wasn't going to waste the life, and the cancer, I think probably, if anything, helped him to realize how precious his life was. He wasn't going to waste any of that life on negativity or on focusing on things that he couldn't do anything about. He was sick in his body, but he decided that he wanted to keep his soul healthy, and that he knew that complaining and focusing on negativity and feeling sorry for himself and feeling like a victim, that wasn't going to be good for his soul. So that's the problem with complaining. Complaining is something that kind of wears away at our soul, which really is another way of saying our emotional and spiritual and general happiness and sense of well-being. So there's a prayer written by a German theologian, Reinhold Niebuhr, who was writing 50 years ago or so. A prayer you may have heard. It's called the Serenity Prayer, and it really addresses this whole issue. The Serenity Prayer goes like this: God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things that I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. And if we can live like that this year, and the other thing I would say is we haven't really started getting into complaining, full bore yet. We're still pretty happy with the year. But if we can approach the year kind of with that in mind, that we're not going to get into complaining so much, that we're going to rather take the path of trying to see what we can change and doing what we can about it in our lives that maybe are making us unhappy, and dealing with the things we can't change. We do get frustrated. We do sometimes need to share our unhappiness. Sometimes we need to make a complaint when we feel that we're being treated unjustly or unfairly. And it's important to do that when it's appropriate and in appropriate ways. But I think that what we need to keep in mind is that the power to live our lives the way that we want to live them is ours alone, that nobody can take that power away from us. We can only choose to give that power away. And what I'm suggesting is that we not do that. And just to end, I'll end with a quote from Shirley Chisholm. She was a woman who had every right to complain. She was the first African-American woman to be elected to Congress in 1965, so she would have had a lot to complain about. But this is what Shirley said. She said, we don't make progress by standing on the sidelines and whining and complaining. We make progress by implementing ideas. So I can just say to that, amen, Shirley. So I want to thank Brianna Hick, who was my inspiration for this morning, to think about, reflect about, and talk a little bit about complaining. And I'm going to turn things over to Brianna, who has a poem that she's going to share with us.
Hello, my name is Brianna. I'm a grade 11 student in Groves, and I'm going to be reciting a poem to you. Now, I did say this poem when I was in grade 8. I was going to say it when I was in grade 12, but I figured with COVID and everything, it's just the perfect poem to say now. The following are true stories. May 26th. 2003, Aaron Ralston was hiking. A boulder fell in his right hand. He waited 4 days and then amputated his own arm with a pocket knife. On New Year's Eve, a woman was bungee jumping in Zimbabwe. The cord broke. She then fell into a river and had to swim in crocodile-infested waters with a broken collarbone. Claire Champlain was smashed in the face by a 5-pound watermelon being propelled by a slingshot. Matthew Brobist was hit by a javelin. David Striegel was punched in the mouth by a kangaroo. The most amazing parts about all these stories is when asked about the experiences, they all smiled, shrugged, and said, I guess things could have been worse. So go ahead. Tell me you're having a bad day. Tell me about the traffic. Tell me about your boss. Tell me about the job you've been trying to quit for the past 4 years. Tell me that your morning is just a townhouse burning to the ground and the snooze button is a fire extinguisher. Tell me that the alarm clock stole the keys to your smile, drove it into 7 a.m., and the crash totaled your happiness. Tell me, how blessed are we to have tragedies so small they can fit on the tips of our tongues. You see, when Evan lost his legs, he was speechless. When my cousin was assaulted, she didn't speak for 48 hours. When my uncle was murdered, we had to send a search party to find my father's voice. Most people have no idea that tragedy and silence have the exact same address. When your day is a museum of events hanging from disappointments that were outside of your control. When you're flailing in an ocean of why is this happening to me? When it feels like your guardian angel put his 2-week notice in 2 months ago and just decided not to tell you. When it feels like God is just a babysitter that's always on the phone. When you're punched in the esophagus by a fistful of life. Remember that every year 2 million people die of dehydration, so it doesn't matter if the glass is half full or half empty. There's water in the cup. Drink it and stop complaining. Muscle is created by repeatedly lifting things that have been designed to weigh us down. So when your shoulders feel heavy, stand up straight, lift your chin, hell, call it exercise. Remember that life is just a gym membership with a really complicated cancellation policy. Remember that you will survive. Remember, things could be worse. Remember, we are never, ever given anything that we can't handle. When the world crumbles around you, you have to look at the wreckage and build a new one from the pieces that are still here. Remember, you are still here. The human heart beats approximately 4,000 times per hour. Each pulse, each throb, each palpitation is a trophy engraved with the words, "You are still alive." You are still alive. Act like it. That is a poem by Rudy Francisco called Complainers. Thank you.